Let's just be real for a second. An ESG policy, it's just a piece of paper until it's actually codified into an investment mandate that an asset manager simply can't ignore. The real work, and yeah, the hard work, is translating those big principles into a real-world portfolio. That's the gap we're going to bridge right now. So you've done it. You've navigated all the internal politics, you've gotten the buy-in, the policy is signed, sealed, and delivered. But now what? Now comes the most critical handoff of all. How do you make sure the asset manager, the one who's probably incentivized by quarterly returns, is actually going to execute on your multi-decade vision? This is where good intentions meet cold, hard reality. And you know, what this really comes down to is a classic issue in finance, the agency problem. Asset owners, like a big pension fund, they're planning for things decades away. Their entire focus is on long-term value. But the asset managers, well, they're often judged and paid based on what happens next quarter. That massive disconnect in time horizons is pretty much the single biggest hurdle to making ESG really work in practice.
And that's exactly why a well-crafted mandate is so much more than just a list of do's and don'ts. Its main job, its whole purpose, is to solve that agency problem. It forces an alignment of those time horizons. It makes long-term factors like climate risk a central part of the entire investment process. It gets everyone looking at the same distant horizon.
Okay, so how do we actually do this? Well, the very first step is to get ruthlessly specific. Before you can even think about writing a single line of a mandate, you have to define exactly what ESG means to your organization. This is all about turning those broad, feel-good principles into a sharp, coherent strategy. And you have to understand, these beliefs can be fundamentally different from one another. I mean, just look at a pension fund. For them, decarbonization isn't just a nice ethical goal. It's about mitigating the huge financial risk of stranded assets to protect returns for their members down the line. Now contrast that with a sovereign wealth fund. They might be laser-focused on national development. And a foundation, they're often driven by pure values alignment, making absolutely sure their investments don't contradict their core mission. Defining this why is the bedrock of the entire mandate. All right, so once that philosophy is crystal clear, the next step is to embed it right into the legal and operational heart of the process. This is where we translate those core beliefs into specific, enforceable terms that, frankly, leave no room for ambiguity. You know, when you strip it all away, this entire process really just boils down to two fundamental questions. First, how will the manager actually deliver on this? This is all about their process. And second, how are we, the asset owner, going to ensure accountability? This is all about monitoring. Every single clause in your mandate should be designed to answer one of those two questions. Let's make this really concrete. We'll start with our first archetype, the pension fund, which is all about that long-term risk. For them, a mandate can't just be some vague goal. It means spelling out hard targets, like a portfolio carbon intensity reduction of 7% year on year, and that target has a direct domino effect, right? It impacts sector allocation and even which specific securities can get into the portfolio in the first place based on their transition plans. Okay, now let's switch gears and look at the sovereign wealth fund, which is often focused on creating a positive national impact. Their mandate is going to look pretty different. It might require a specific allocation to companies that are advancing, say, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or it could even mandate investment in local industries. And just as important, it would exclude anything that runs counter to national policy. And finally, let's look at the foundation, where that strict alignment with their values is the absolute driving force. For them, the mandate becomes heavily reliant on screening. They might exclude any company involved in controversial weapons or any company facing credible allegations of forced labor. This can even extend to divesting from entire countries if the situation gets bad enough. The mandate becomes a direct, literal reflection of the foundation's ethical charter. So you've done it. You've built the perfect mandate. But let's be honest, it's pretty much worthless if it's in the wrong hands. And that brings us to maybe the most critical step of all, picking a manager who can actually execute it. It's so easy for a manager to have a glossy ESG policy. The real test, it's their process. You have to lift the hood and see what's really going on. Is ESG truly integrated into their day-to-day investment decisions, or is it just a marketing overlay they slapped on top? This means you've got to ask tougher questions. Don't just ask if they integrate ESG, ask how. Make them show you their valuation model. Make them point to the exact line item where water scarcity risk changed their forecast for a company. Question a high portfolio turnover. How does that square with a long-term view?
and demand a specific example, a hard case, where their ESG analysis actually prevented a loss. This is what separates the real deal from just talk.
And this quote just nails it, really. It's not about how a manager handles the easy calls, the obvious leaders in sustainability. It's about the complex, gray area companies, the ones with a mixed record. How does their process navigate that complexity? That's where you find out if their ESG integration is truly robust or just for show. So, the mandate is set and the manager is selected. We're done, right? Well, not quite. The final and absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle is closing the loop with rigorous, ongoing accountability. It's so important to think of this process not as a straight line, but as a continuous cycle, right? The mandate informs the manager selection. The selection leads to ongoing monitoring. And the reporting that comes out of that monitoring, it feeds right back into refining the mandate over time. It's a dynamic, living process. So what does good reporting actually look like in the real world? It's definitely not some generic newsletter. It's specific. It details the outcomes of engagements with companies. For private assets, it tracks performance against those pre-agreed KPIs. And crucially, it benchmarks your portfolio's ESG profile against the market. This is about hard data, not just a nice story.
Which really leaves us with this final question to think about. Is the reporting you receive, or maybe the reporting you provide, is it just a formality? Is it a box-ticking exercise? Or is it a genuine tool for accountability and for change? The answer to that question, well, it determines everything. It's the difference between an ESG policy that's just a document and one that is a true force for creating long-term sustainable value.